We've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only three people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's on your teeth. It's on your teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The long-running question has been whether Nigel Farage would be welcome in today's Tory party. But as Sir Keir Starmer praises Margaret Thatcher, Brexit, calls for less immigration and shifts his position on green pledges, is it time for the leader of the opposition to join the Tory party first? The longest strike in NHS history has been announced, with the British Medical Association ordering 216 hours of industrial inaction, both in the lead-up to Christmas and just after the New Year. The three-day High Court showdown between the Duke of Sussex and the Home Office commences, with the prodigal prince rather characteristically claiming he was treated less favourably in his case for royal police protection. And perhaps most importantly, it's the bread battle. The ghastly national takeover of sourdough bread has culminated in a rebranding of Lidl's range after it emerged the supermarket giant had, in a scandal of international proportions, been using yeast in its sourdough. I'm asking what's wrong with mother's pride. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most theatrical panel this evening, the criminal barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes and the recalcitrant journalist and author Michael Crick. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's what you've all been waiting for. It's the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight from the GB newsroom is that a 28-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder today following the stabbing of a 29-year-old woman in Aberfan in South Wales earlier on today. The pregnant woman was subjected to a knife attack this morning. Chief Inspector Rob Miles from South Wales Police gave this update earlier.
The man is known to the victim and is currently in police custody. I appreciate there will be a real sense of shock within the local community with the attack having happened in broad daylight. Local schools activated their lockdown protocols to keep people safe. Neighbourhood officers have been in the area to ensure pupils have been able to leave the school safely at their normal time. This was done as a precaution, and schools will open tomorrow as normal. This was a targeted attack. The woman remains in hospital with injuries which are not believed to be life-threatening at this time.
Detective Chief Inspector Rob Miles there in South Wales. Now, the Home Secretary said today he's uncomfortable with some of the criticism directed at Rwanda as he unveiled a new asylum treaty in Kigali. It's understood new British laws are to be expedited through Parliament, declaring Rwanda a safe country for the processing of asylum seekers arriving in the UK. James Cleverly praised Rwanda for being part of the British solution. But the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, cast doubt on the plans.
They've sent more Home Secretaries than they have asylum seekers to Rwanda, and this scheme is badly failing. They still won't tell us how much it will cost, even though we've already know that we've spent £140 million or more on this scheme. And what they could be doing is putting that money into going after the criminal smuggler gangs and taking action there instead.
Junior doctors in England are set to stage the longest strike in NHS history after talks on an improved pay deal with the government broke down. Ministers and the British Medical Association, the Junior Doctors Union, have been locked in negotiations now for 5 weeks, trying to find a resolution to the dispute. The BMA says the government's offered a pay increase of just 3%, which it says amounts to a pay cut for many doctors. The first walkouts are due to start across England from 7 a.m. on the 20th of December. Relatives of victims of the infected blood scandal have delivered a letter to Downing Street today. They're calling for immediate action now from the government after MPs voted last night in favour of speeding up compensation payments to victims. But the government says it wants to wait for the full report into the infected blood scandal before considering any compensation. Around 30,000 people were given contaminated blood in the 70s and 80s in Britain. Since then, 3,000 of them have died. The High Court was told today that the impact of a successful attack on the Duke of Sussex should have been considered when his security arrangements were changed in 2020. Prince Harry was stripped of special protections normally afforded to royals when he stepped back from his role and moved to the United States. His lawyers say a failure, though, to carry out a full risk assessment meant he was treated in an unlawful and unfair way when he was provided with a weaker kind of security. And lastly, Denny Laine, Wings and Moody Blues musician, has died at the age of 79. His wife said in an online tribute today that her husband had died after a long battle with lung disease. Laine sang on the Moody Blues multi-million-selling Go Now and co-wrote the Wings hit Mull of Kintyre. In 2018, Laine was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Denny Laine, who died today. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
It all began at the Conservative Party conference at a spectator event when I was asked if Nigel Farage would be welcome in the Conservative Party, to which I replied, of course. And although he might be a bit left-wing, I think we could make room for him. And what started as a joke became a serious question, with the Prime Minister supporting his return when asked at the same conference, a view that he restated the other day. But perhaps there is a more pressing question at hand. A man wrote an article for The Telegraph last week entitled "Voters Have Been Betrayed on Brexit and Immigration." Indeed, this reads as if it were vintage Farage. The man in question went on to hail Margaret Thatcher as the leader who dragged Britain out of its stupor by setting loose our natural entrepreneurialism. What a wonderful fellow he must be to say such wise and good things. He then went on and criticised the wasted money, the high debt and the record high tax burden. He sounds as if he could be a member of the ERG. He said the British public expects our borders and security to be prioritised. Our hero went on to explain that this government was elected to bring down immigration, for immigration to then triple is more than just another failure. It's a betrayal of their promises. I said something similar last week. He criticised the government's shortage occupation list that enables firms to pay migrants 20% less than those already in the UK. He lambasted the neighbourhoods plagued by crime and antisocial behaviour. In a speech about the economy, he warned that we shouldn't turn on the spending taps and that we should expect extremely tight spending constraints. I mean, this sounds like Geoffrey Howe speeded up. And on the question of net zero, that thing so beloved by the woke, the left, the Islingtonians, he recently faced the eco-mob down for reneging on support for 28 billion annual spending on clean energy. So who is this man, this great Conservative-sounding figure? Is he a cabinet minister waiting in the wings for a Tory party leadership bid? One setting out his stall along with another of other ministers who seem to be circling. He must be among the most ardent of Eurosceptics, a member of the Go for Growth movement, a Thatcherite, a Trussite even, a capitalist, a sensible free market Conservative. But the man I'm referring to is not Nigel Farage, Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, or even me for that matter. I'm, of course, talking about the leader of the Labour Party, the Socialist Party, Sir Keir Starmer. So the more pressing question is not whether Nigel Farage will join the Tory party, but whether Sir Keir Starmer is planning to defect and launch a Tory leadership bid. After all, we've had one or two of them in recent years. As a Tory member, I would like to extend a welcome to the Leader of the Opposition with open arms. He is welcome to cross the floor whenever he likes, and we'd be delighted to have him. As we often say, as I've said many times, there is more joy in heaven over the one sinner who repenteth than over the 99 just people who do not need to repent. As always, I want to hear from you, mailmog at GB News, but I'm now joined by James Matheson, a former spokesman for the Labour Party. James, thank you very much for joining me. We now have a situation where the Leader of the Opposition is saying things that are more right-wing than the Prime Minister and half of his cabinet. Is he a secret Tory, or is this an electoral ploy?
Well, I know you've tried very hard to disguise your joy, Jacob, this evening, but I'm afraid, unfortunately, it's not shared entirely by members of the Labour Party, or indeed some Labour MPs who I've spoken with in recent days, especially since that piece came out where Keir Starmer went to town and decided to heap praise on Margaret Thatcher. Now, I know we'll have our differences on this. However, the Labour Party is not known for being a place that welcomes or, in fact, celebrates Margaret Thatcher's achievements. So it's a new thing for us to get used to, certainly, to hear a Labour leader saying things like this. I understand the strategy of it, as I'm sure you do as well. He seems to have won you over, and I think we'll be questioning whether you're going to go along and join him, later on and cross the floor. But the reality of the situation is many people are concerned about how far he takes this and why he feels the need to do so when he's so far ahead in the polls already.
But it's just what Tony Blair did, isn't it, that when he became Prime Minister, he invited Margaret Thatcher to Downing Street. He tried to move away from the 1980s-style hostility. And, of course, he adopted a lot of her policies. I wouldn't quite say he stole her clothes, which would have been a rather odd look for him. But nonetheless, he took on quite a lot of the Thatcher orthodoxy. And it was very successful.
It was, and I mean, that's exactly, the people around Keir Starmer know that, they remember that. Some of them are the same people who suggested doing that at the time, and it worked, as you say. The result of winning that election, which is where Labour are at the moment, they need to win the election. That'll be the conversations that are happening, even from the level of whips, I would imagine, in Parliament at the moment, especially with some of the unsettled nerves that I've heard amongst Labour MPs. And I'm not talking about just hard left, those in the Socialist Campaign Group, for example. I'm talking about normal Labour backbenchers who were starting to think, hang on a minute, I didn't sign up to be praising Margaret Thatcher. This isn't going to go down well in my Red Wall constituency. So he needs to be very careful with it. But, we understand the strategy.
Well, thank you very much, James. Well, with me now is my theatrical panel, criminal barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes, and the recalcitrant journalist and author Michael Crick. Well, recalcitrant journalist and author Michael Crick. Do you think he's going too far with this, or it's a quite clever strategy?
Well, as James says, it's not really clear why he's doing it. Labour are doing pretty well in the polls. And, of course, the danger is they will lose people on the left, not to more left-wing parties, because there really aren't any more left, but the Greens, I suppose, they will lose people to, and to the Liberal Democrats, and maybe pick up Conservative votes. So I'm not sure what the tactical thinking of it is. It's not new, as you say. Blair did it. Brown did it. If you remember, within a few days of becoming Prime Minister in 2007, he had Thatcher into Downing Street. It's interesting that Conservative leaders don't do the reverse. David Cameron said he was the heir to Blair, but that was a private comment that was leaked. He never publicly came out with that. The difference, I would say, with Starmer and Blair is actually Blair did have a few radical policies which he carried out, like the minimum wage, like devolution to Scotland and Wales. With Starmer, it's difficult to see what there is left in his knapsack that is radical at all.
And Blair had a personality.
He did.
What happened to Starmer's personality, if I've ever had one? But deep in the primordial soup of Labour, there is a primal scream against Margaret Thatcher. In many areas, and you know this better than I do, she's hated. When she died, oh yes, when she died, there were effigies burnt of her. The Wicked Witch is dead. There is a genuine sense of grievous, whether it was right or it was wrong, I think it was wrong, against her. And this is a very foolish thing to do. And as Michael said, he didn't need to do it. So he's really messed up the Corbynites. He's really messed up. What does Angela Rayner think about this? Oh, we'll probably hear in the Sunday newspapers. But this is a mistake. It's not going to lose mid-election. All he has to do is not fall over and you know, say the C word. But he said the C word, Conservative.
Conservative. He said an important. He said an important C word, and it makes it much harder for the Tories to attack him as being on the far left, as being Corbynista with better clothes.
He supported him.
It's been hard to do that for a long time. He did support Corbyn, and he said Jeremy Corbyn is my friend. He now says Jeremy Corbyn was never my friend. Yes. There's a certain inconsistency there. The unions disappeared quite a while ago. And they have virtually no influence on the Labour Party at the moment.
So he's big business. He wants the money.
It's just like Blair. But I mean, the Labour Party conference this year, you know, all the schmoozing with the corporate world.
Oh, but is he transitioning? And I think we can show a picture of this from being Keir Starmer into being Nigel Farage, because that's where the votes seem to be. Look, there we go. Brilliant. There it is. You see the morphing of one into the other, and that helps him with the red wall, pick up the old Labour voters who.
Well, you see, as Jerry's pointed out, the red wall is actually a lot of it is those areas, coal and steel areas, where actually they hated Thatcher.
Yeah, yes.
But I think that is dying out, and it's nothing like as bad as it. I mean, it was in that regard, it was a much more courageous thing for Blair and Brown to do it. But of course, they were solidly Labour then. Now, of course, the red wall, most of it, has voted Conservative at the last election. So it's a complicated thing. I just wish that, you know, Starmer would come out with something a bit radical that makes one can make one excited, make people excited about voting Labour.
He's terrified because there's only one person who can mess up this election, and that's Starmer
himself. Well,
so you're welcoming him.
If you want to become a Tory, I'm absolutely delighted. What was it Margaret Thatcher once said? The facts of life are conservative.
So you're the same party with Farage and Starmer in, and you.
Give the boy a chance. Give the boy a chance.
Boggling away whilst you say that. Anyway, my panel has to be momentarily silent. Thank you to them. Coming up, it's another case of cynically timed strikes from the British Medical Association as they plan to disrupt Christmas. And don't forget, the Duke of Sussex has found a new hobby, suing people in the High Court.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is still State of the Nation. We've been discussing Sir Keir Starmer's Tory party leadership bid, and you've been sending in your views. Tippy says, I could never vote for Keir, as I simply do not know exactly where he stands. Now, I don't think he does either, actually. And Brian, the Tories are working on the philosophy of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. There now follows a public service announcement. There apparently appears on your television screen a QR code which allows you to vote for Mr. Nigel Farage. May I encourage to do this in the interests and safety of the nation? Thank you. Now, I'm afraid it's that time when I must pull out the wonderful list that debunks many of the claims the British Medical Association makes about junior doctors as they announced the longest strike in NHS history today. Doctors will be engaging in an accumulative 216 hours of industrial inaction from the 20th to the 22nd of December, and then from the 3rd to the 8th of January. Medicine graduates earn more after 1 year and after 10 years of graduating than people who've done the following degrees: veterinary, nursing, engineering, economics, physics, maths, computing, chemistry, politics, business, languages, geography, law, history, biosciences, philosophy, teaching, sociology, English and psychology. So it really does beg the question, if a 6% pay rise, as suggested by the review body of doctors' and dentists' remuneration, won't make them happy, what will? Well, with me now still is my brilliant panel, Jerry Hayes and Michael Crick. Jerry, this is really tactically clever, isn't it, from their point of view? You take the 22nd of December and the 3rd to 6th of January, you are basically on strike for the whole of the Christmas period.
No, it's tactically stupid, because you've got someone like Victoria Atkins. I've known her since she was a kid. I was PPS to her dad years ago, who's reasonable, who's decent. He's on the right side of the Conservative Party, which means on the left side of the Conservative Party, of course. And she offered an olive branch, and they just spat in her face. I don't think this is going to go down well. They want 35%. They want their wages to go back to what they were in 2008. That's not realistic at all. It's wrong. It's going to backfire. One of the things I did, gosh, it was 1989, I think it was. Ken Clarke asked me to sell the new GP's contract. Wow, those people in the BMA are far, far more political, far, far more devious than just about anyone in the House of Commons.
It's very hard to justify, isn't it? Because this is, I said tactically clever, but it's definitely clever, tricksy to go from the 22nd, because Christmas is a Christmas service, New Year is a New Year service. You're basically having the 12 days of Christmas and a few extra days. You're going right the way through to Epiphany with no proper NHS.
Well, I mean, good luck to them. I support the junior doctors. It's good that we find something we disagree on, actually.
No, but...
you know, you compare them with economists. Economists don't have to work the extraordinary hours that junior doctors don't have to work. They don't have the horrible stresses of looking after patients.
Because they always get it wrong. And
yeah.
It's stressful for them.
If you want stress, come to the criminal bar.
The junior doctors are having is going to mean people die.
Yes.
Let's be frank about this. And
I
that's
think
a responsibility on their consciences.
If we don't ensure that our health service recruits more doctors and retains doctors, then lots of people are going to die as well.
Michael, the plan, which even the Labour Party supports.
Yes. What?
The plan. You know the plan.
I think it might be helpful if you think about this.
There is a plan for recruitment for the future. It's a 10-year plan, which for politicians is quite unusual. BMA supported it.
Yeah. The plan. However, it's much more efficient if you can persuade junior doctors to carry on. They are leaving, I can't remember the figures now, but they are leaving in significant numbers, year after year after year.
Go to Australia to earn more money.
To earn more money.
No.
And you've made my point for me.
No, but they should be allowed to.
And, you know, you are both, but we're all believers in the free market here. And if they can just go to Australia or New Zealand and get probably an easier job for better pay, pay, who can blame them? Well, the government has to match them. No. Now, you talk about the 35% pay rise. Nobody seriously thinks they're going to get a 35% pay rise now, but the government could work out a way of saying, OK, over the next 10 years, we will restore that loss of pay that you've had. And actually, things are looking good. Both sides have said they're constructive.
That restore line is completely bogus, as you know. They took the highest relative year in their recent history and then have applied RPI to that in a way that no other business has had. And they also ignore the increments that people get as they get promoted. So nobody's actually had this pay cut that they talk about.
Well, why should one include the increments? The increments are earned by through experience and through being, as you go on, you become a better doctor.
Because the propaganda gives the impression that doctors have had a real terms cut. No doctor has had a real terms cut because they've all got the increments. They are all better paid.
Yes, but they are 35%. Junior doctors are 35% worse paid than they were. What is the date?
Well,
you could say that. As indeed a vast numbers of people throughout the public sector.
Which is randomly the highest year which they can point to in relative terms.
Actually, I mean, this really does. I mean, it's not just the junior doctors. It's other members of the other people in the public sector, people in the private sector. Many people have not had a pay rise in this country for 15 years, since the financial crisis, really. And the strain is being told, and that is why we have labour shortages in so many fields, both public and private. I mean, I realise the government can't suddenly concede the whole of these pay rises overnight, but they can develop a long-term... They've got to develop a long-term plan if they're going to retain these people and stop them going to Australia.
With almost everybody other than the most militant unions, the Odd Train Union and the BMA. The most militant, hard-line, hard-left unions are the ones who are still determined to disrupt public services. Well, everyone else pretty much has agreed.
I think it may not be far off a deal. Both sides. I mean, they met the other day, and the junior doctors said that Victoria Atkins was being constructive. She said they were being constructive. That is actually substantial progress from the situation under Steve Barclay.
Absolutely right. Steve Barclay's a bit of a grumpy old devil.
No, Steve Barclay's an excellent man. I worked very closely with him. He's one of the...
he was a grumpy old devil.
But he's not. He's one of the best and most competent ministers in the government. He really is very impressive.
Yeah.
But I've got to move on after that tribute to my friend Steve Barclay. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, James Cleverly has been busy today signing a new treaty in Rwanda. But will it cut the mustard? Plus, the bread battle is underway. Can we only hope that sourdough doesn't win? I'm for mother's pride. As no...
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. There's only three people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Akweer, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing selfish doctors going on strike over Christmas, and you've been sending your views. Christopher says, shouldn't any NHS staff leaving the country repay all training costs? And Tom goes back to our previous segment. Keir Starmer's new campaign music is by Culture Club. Starmer, 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 Chameleon. Someone else can work out the rest of the lyrics, and perhaps we'll get Jerry to sing it at the end of the programme. A new treaty has been signed between the Home Secretary, James Cleverly, and his Rwandan counterpart today, as the means of tightening the plan so as to cope with the Supreme Court ruling earlier this month. The deal will establish a new appeals process for exceptional cases, such as individuals in the scheme who have committed crimes, with the Rwandan authorities seeking deportation claims, which will have both British and Rwandan judges overseeing cases. Whether the details of this treaty, along with its ratification in Parliament, as well as the pushing through of emergency legislation, will be enough to overcome the obstacles erected by the Supreme Court remains to be seen. But it's vital that the government gets this right, because it cannot be looming over the Tories at the next election. Well, my panel are before my panel, I'm being joined by the barrister and writer Stephen Barrett. Stephen, thank you very much for joining me again on this. What you know of the treaty, does it go far enough to satisfy the Supreme Court?
Well, I think what's important for your viewers to understand is that the Supreme Court is not for or against the Rwanda plan. And that's really fundamental to our Constitution, because immediately when they said that the last iteration, the last version didn't work, they received criticism for something they hadn't done, and they received a lot of praise for something they hadn't done. And it's really important that we all draw back and understand what our courts are doing. All they're doing is administering the law properly and making sure that any scheme fits pre-existing law. Parliament has the power to change any pre-existing law, so any scheme is possible, and we don't really have public law in this country. We have what's called administrative law, and everybody needs to go back to that. Public law is the idea that courts and government are oppositional, that they're fighting, and that's not right. That's not what ours are doing. Our courts are not fighting the government, and so what has happened now is I'll bore your viewers a bit. We had a memorandum of understanding, which is weak in international law. It's not binding even in international law, and we had an addendum to that. We now have a treaty, which is roughly twice as many words, and they've clearly got their heads screwed on, and they're doing what you would do, what any of us would do. They've gone through each of the criticisms by the Supreme Court, and they've tried to address them. And what they will now do, I hope there'll be a second part to this. So we've beefed up the memorandum of understanding. We've made it a binding treaty in international law, but the most important law is always our domestic law. And I hope and trust that there will be some changes in our domestic law to absolutely see this through, so that if it does end up in front of the Supreme Court, again, because of the people who are very animated about this, the Supreme Court will be able to say, no, this time they've got everything right. And to be perfectly honest, Jacob, this task could have been started in April last year. You know, we could have been hotter on this. I mean, I'm not criticising or taking any political stance on it, but I've just noticed that we have now changed tempo in how we are approaching this. We are now approaching this properly, with our heads screwed on, with good law and a proper understanding of what's going on. It's a sea change really in the last week. And I think that needs noting. Whether you like it or not depends on whether or not you like the Rwanda plan. So again, that's not for me. But it does seem that there's been at least a sea change.
I do get your point that the court is not there to say whether it likes the Rwanda plan or not. But didn't it seem a bit odd to you that the court decided to prefer the evidence of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees rather than the British government?
Yes, you have gone laser-like to the one weakness in the Supreme Court position, and it was in the Court of Appeal. And I think we as a nation are going to, and this actually isn't really connected with Rwanda at all, because the most pressing evidence of this is what's going on in Israel and Gaza right now. But there are very serious questions about the UN, about its probity, about its veracity, whether it is actually saying things upon which we can rely. I mean, there were really serious questions about what's happening with the UN, and the one oddity, the one striking oddity of the Supreme Court judgment was how it just simply trusted, if a UN agency says it, I trust that. Well, that's not how I was trained to deal with evidence. I find it surprising in such an eminent a court, and I'm sad to say that they may well find themselves with egg on their face, because the UN may very soon prove deeply untrustworthy. I mean, there are allegations it hid an Israeli hostage. I mean, there's nothing lower than that.
No, indeed. Well, look, thank you very much, Stephen. It's such a pleasure to have you on to cut through these knotty issues, which my panel, Jerry Hayes and Michael Crick, will continue to cut through. Michael, regardless of whether you think Rwanda is a good idea or not, if you were trying to make Rwanda happen, do you think this is a good way of doing it?
Well, I think it will go some of the way to answering the Supreme Court's objections. And, you know, they're setting up this new appeals, final appeal and things like that in Rwanda. I think the problem they may have with the Supreme Court is the Supreme Court also said that the culture within Rwanda was not friendly to refugees or asylum seekers from certain parts of the world, notably the Middle East and from Afghanistan, and that covers a lot of them. And I don't see how you deal with that with a treaty or some legislation in the Rwandan parliament or our parliament. I mean, culture can only be changed over time. And so, you know, I think the Supreme Court could still object to it on those grounds, but they may be happy on the other major grounds they had that that's enough and OK, we'll vote it through.
Jerry, as a lawyer, how do you react to the proposition that Parliament can legislate to say anything, and as long as it says it clearly enough, that is the law and the courts must follow it?
Absolutely right.
And they cannot appeal to international law. What Parliament says is the final word.
Parliament is sovereign. It always has been, even before Brexit.
I agree with that, yes.
And it's important that people understand that. The trouble with Rwanda policy is Rwanda. If they'd picked just about any other African country, we wouldn't have had these problems. But this was a thing, I think, was started by Priti Patel. And Suella, well, the problem with Suella, I mean, it's like a PPE essay, discuss. I mean, she actually came up with some reasonable ideas, but then she drowned it out by saying really, really stupid things. So we'll only remember Suella Braverman for saying the silly things and not the occasional sensible things that she said.
But don't you think British voters see her as somebody who's on their side, wants to get things done, is active, is forthright, is bold?
For heaven's sake, you just see her as someone who's rather a mouthy, shouty individual who's desperate to become leader of the Conservative Party, who wants to destabilise
Michael,
this
isn't that just the view of a posh lawyer?
Yeah, probably.
I don't think anyone's accused of being
what I want you say almost any African country would have been...
Well, not any African.
But the trouble with a lot of Africa is the human rights records there.
Yes,
are dreadful.
pretty bad.
You know, in Rwanda, President Kagame is, you know, sort of bumped off or tried to bump off several of his... Thank you. Well, if he does, I will rely on you, a well-known libel lawyer. But he's suspected of bumping off many of his opponents or trying to. It is a dodgy place in terms of human rights. It's not the best place to be exporting asylum seekers or refugees to. Now, I'm not against the idea of trying to find somewhere.
No, I agree.
But I think they're going to have to look harder. And after all, it's not the numbers that go there, it's the deterrent effect.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
And, you know, if they manage to fly out 2,000 or 3,000, that will have a sufficient deterrent effect to make people think, well, we'll stick in France or we'll go to Denmark or somewhere.
Jake, could you explain this? Because I really generally don't understand. We're saying it's a deterrent effect, and you obviously want to sell the policy. But we're saying, well, go to Rwanda and you can start a new life. Whoa, you can get a job. Whoa, well, that's not much of a deterrent, is it?
Well, I think it is. If you don't want to go to Rwanda, you want to come to Somerset, yes. It's a deterrent when you're told you're going several thousand miles away to a different country. But fortunately, the bell has metaphorically tolled. So thank you to my panel, who we will see next week. Coming up, you may wonder what the Duke of Sussex does all day now that he's abandoned his royal duties. But as ever, he remains very busy. And don't forget, we'll be assessing the scandal that has shocked and indeed divided the nation. The question of defining sourdough bread.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. We've been discussing the Rwanda plan, and Alex says, I hope that when James Cleverly signed the new treaty, that it includes keeping the human rights lawyers out of the mix. They're making a lot of money out of the migrant crisis. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are great advocates for their privacy, to pursue their own lives free from the tyranny of the British media, which holds them in such a tight grip and keeps them in the public limelight. And you may wonder what the Sussexes get up to now that they have abandoned their royal duties and released practically every detail of their private lives via biography or documentary. And the answer revealed itself today as the Duke enjoyed his latest hobby, taking people to court. This time, it's the Home Office over the question of personal security after the Committee on Security for Royal and Public Figures cut his level of security after he stepped down as a serving royal. Well, Vox Populi Vox Dei, GB News asked the great British people if the taxpayer should pay for the Duke's security, and the people have spoken.
Normally pay for his own private security out of his own funds. He's not a member of the royal family as such, and also because he still earns a lot of money through other different means, and should therefore has got plenty of sufficient funds to pay for his own private security.
So if he pays for it himself, he's welcome back, but not for us to pay.
He could always make a gesture, can he? That would please everybody. At the end of the day, he's still the king's son, so why shouldn't he be looked after?
I don't think any taxpayer should be paying for the monarchy anymore. I think the state of this country, the state of the NHS, the amount of homeless people on the streets, I think we've got much bigger issues that we should be paying for.
I think he should pay for his own if he don't want to be royal family. If he wants to come over, let him pay for it.
He decided that he didn't want to be part of the royal family anymore, so no.
He was born into the royal family, he had no choice. And I do think although everything that has happened, I think a lot has been wrong on Harry's part, I do think they do owe him still some sort of protection, yeah.
Well, I'm joined now by the former head of Royal Protection, Di Davis. Di, thank you very much for joining me. Looking at this from your former role as head of Royal Protection, do you think the criteria for protection is met by the Duke of Sussex?
Well, the simple answer is no. Like previous speakers you've had, I go on evidence. And I'd like to see the evidence that has been put forward both by himself and indeed Radek, the committee. They have had a number of different agencies put their source of intelligence and methodology into the mix. And as a consequence of, as I presume, the latest up-to-date intelligence, they don't think he warrants the level of security as provided by the Royalty Protection Command. That's the basic issue. So I really want to see if he feels he has the evidence, let him put it forward. And if there is such evidence, then yes, the Metropolitan Police should provide security if and when he's here on royal-related duties. If, however, he's there on commercial duties, then with great respect, he should pay for it himself.
That seems perfectly reasonable. And in terms of royal security in this country, I went to an event in Bath with the Citizens Advice Bureau that the Princess Royal was going to. And as far as I could tell, Her Royal Highness drove her own car, that there was a constable on the beat who kept an eye on her car. But other than that, there seemed to be no security other than a lady in waiting.
Well, I suspect you might not have seen the Royalty Protection Officer. Unlike so many countries, they are very, very discreet. And it may well be there were people, officers who would have advanced it. And again, they look like the rest of us. They don't stand out in a crowd, most of them. One or two of them do. But again, the role of the Royalty Protection is to protect, and certainly that individual gets protection. But, you know, I've studied the history of attacks on the royal family going back hundreds of years. The number of times Royalty Protection have had to draw a firearm, and that's what he wants. He wants a firearm unit to protect him. And again, controversially, an assistant commissioner who retired said lots of people had been prosecuted. Well, I can't find any evidence of anyone being prosecuted other than three individuals, one of them a 19-year-old so-called fascist who had some dreadful posters with Harry depicted in it. But I can't find any evidence of these people, the former assistant commissioner said, were so dreadful that they've been prosecuted. They may have been trolled, they may have had this, that, and the other, but I welcome anybody telling me I'm wrong, and I'll put my hands up. But you really have to go back in history to find evidence of a criminal attack on our royal families with a gun.
And isn't one of the great things about this country is that, unlike America, public figures don't go round with swathes of armed people as essentially a status symbol. And there's a point at which it tips over from being security to being an expression of power.
Well, you're right again. And of course, he has, both in America. And by the way, the statistics for California, as you probably know, for firearms and attacks, it goes out to the window compared to ourselves, even though we've got some degree of lawlessness in this country in comparison with California. And I've worked with the police in California and the Secret Service, etc. Trust me, it's a far, far more dangerous place to live. In terms of when he arrives here, when he's on royal-related duties, i.e. going to see his father for a funeral or whatever, he did get provided royalty protection. So I think Ravak has said it's on a needs basis, but you're not going to get it because you're not a working royal. And so many of his aunts and uncles now don't get the level they had when I was looking after them. We had 22 in my day. I don't know how many get it now, but Uncle Andrew doesn't get it. And a variety of what we call senior royals, they don't get it all the time, 24/7 either.
Well, thank you very much, Di. With me now is the former BBC royal correspondent, Jenny Bond. Jenny, thank you so much for joining me this evening. To what extent do the royals feel that security is actually a status symbol?
Well, I don't think they think it is a status symbol at all. I think they quite reasonably believe that they are a target. And there's no doubt at all that Harry remains a target, I think. I think what the judge has to decide here is whether or not he has been singled out for special and, as he sees it, unfair treatment. Was a risk assessment carried out by Ravak? His lawyers say that it was not carried out in the same way as for other people. Is the risk to Harry the same as it was before he stepped back from royal duties? He remains a prince of the realm. He remains very high in line of succession to the throne. And he remains a man who has quite an extensive military service behind him, and a man who has written publicly that he has killed 25 Taliban. That the judge has to, I think, take into an account as to whether he has a legitimate security risk and he is in danger.
Well, surely the judge has to consider whether the Home Office has been reasonable, not to rejudge the evidence that the panel has looked at. That's a matter for the experts to look at. The judge is simply looking at whether, on a judicial review basis, this is a decision a reasonable person could have come to.
Yes, indeed. And Harry's lawyers have suggested that it's not that the risk assessment wasn't carried out, they claim. Whether it was, of course, I have no idea. But I have some sympathy with Harry on this because he is a very prominent individual. And yet you can argue, of course, that he's found it perfectly easy to come back to the UK on 6 occasions. What he's arguing is that he feels that his family would be in danger if they came back. Again, you can point to the evidence that they have been back since they stepped down from their royal duties. And of course you can argue that life in California is probably much more dangerous than over here. But this is Harry's belief, and I think he has a legitimate case. There are lots of his cases that he brings so incessantly over here against newspapers and what have you, and the previous one against the Home Office, in which he offered to pay for his security. He lost that one. You know, he does have this serial habit of taking things to court. But this one, I think that there's a legitimate case to answer.
But if he pulled himself together, came back to his royal duties, did the job that he was born into, he'd have the security. It's his choice. Isn't that the key point? He's decided not to be a royal, to live in California, and when it suits him, he then wants the security. And people can't, as we've found so often before, have their cake and eat it.
Yes, but he hasn't chosen not to be a royal. He is a royal. He was born a royal. He's born a prince.
Well, then he should do his duty.
Well, you may argue that, but well, I know, I don't wholly agree. I think he was very unhappy in his role, and he has divested himself of that role, and he has gone to California, and he is earning a living, and he is living his own life, but he's still a royal prince, and he is still in line to succession of this throne. He can't get rid of that.
All right, well, thank you very much, Jenny. And last but not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't address the elephant in the room, the elephant that has thundered its way through the nation, shocking and dividing the United Kingdom in a way never seen before, the question of sourdough bread. Sourdough bread is an unappealing name for a second-rate bread that has become popular and has colonised our restaurants and supermarkets in a way no other culinary item could possibly have done. But now the supermarket giant Lidl itself has found itself in the middle of a sourdough, or should I say sour-faux scandal. The German firm has been forced to rebrand its sourdough range after the Real Bread campaign, who unfortunately couldn't rise to the challenge of joining us this evening, hit out, claiming the range contained yeast. Yeast! Oh, ye gads! Automatically disqualifying it from the sourdough category, making it sour faux. But without wanting to butter up Lidl, I would say that this is good news. Sourdough is beastly stuff compared to proper white bread. It's frankly a no-grainer. Anyway, terrible puns included for free. That's all from me. Up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what have you got this evening for us? Any bread and butter pudding?
Well, it's nice to know that you've put that issue to bed once and for all, Jacob. Thank you for that. But look, obviously we've got this new Rwanda deal. Is it legal? I've got a top legal mind on to discuss all of that. Is it going to get through the Tory backbenches? Never mind the Lords. I have got a prominent representative of the ERG on a little bit later on in the show. Should foreign care workers have to speak fluent English? A 91-year-old lady sadly died because her care worker couldn't communicate with emergency services. Are we seeing this a little bit too often in this country? Is it indeed racist to expect that they should speak fluent English if they're prepared to do the job? You touched a bit there on whether or not Harry should have his police protection, taxpayer funded. And of course, I'm also going to be here with my wonderful panel on tomorrow's newspapers today. There's much more on, but you're going to have to tune in to find out.
Oh, that's going to be absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much, Patrick. That's coming up after the Wagger. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the sun is metaphorically shining in Somerset once again, as it always does.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, welcome to your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. It'll be a colder night tonight than last night because much of the country will be under clear spells. That's because the rain many of us have seen through today, brought by this low pressure, is pushing off to the east, and behind it we've got a bit more of a settled interlude, at least that will last at least through Wednesday. So plenty of clear spells out there this evening and a frost developing quite quickly, so temperatures will drop off quite quickly tonight. There's an ice warning in force across eastern areas of Scotland. We'll see some mist and fog developing across parts of Wales and the southwest of England, and it will be widely a frosty start to the day tomorrow. But there will be some sunshine around, particularly across northern areas and eastern areas where the sunshine should last for much of the day. Further west, though, the sunshine will turn hazier throughout the day once any mist and fog clears, and you can see across parts of Northern Ireland there will be rain arriving by lunchtime. That rain will push into parts of Wales as well as Cornwall by the end of the day as well. Temperatures will start to rise, though, in the west with more of a southwesterly breeze. In the east, however, still feeling quite chilly with only highs of around 3 or 4 degrees. And then Thursday is going to be a widely more wet day. There are warnings in force for heavy rain across many western areas as well as parts of Scotland too. There could be some difficult driving conditions because of the rain, and the rain will last through the rest of the week, Friday and into the weekend, but temperatures will start to rise into double figures. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.